All right, welcome back to Seat at the Table. We are now on episode 4, and this week we have very special guests with Brad Kappel from the Brad Kappel team of TTR Sotheby's. Brad, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for coming and joining us at the table.
Brad, I'm happy to be here.
We got two Brads. Two Brads in the room. Yeah, it's a Brad sandwich.
Brad, Betsy, Brad.
There you go.
It's good.
You got it going.
I always say if both Brads are in the room, we're doing okay.
Right.
Something either really good is happening or something really bad's happening. One of the two.
Are you a Bradley?
I am a Bradley.
Yeah. The Bradford thing.
All right, is yours Bradley? Yours is Bradley too.
Yeah,
right?
my mom's maiden name, she's Irish, is Bradley.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mine.
Now
I always say there's only two people. Well, there was only two people. There's only one person left in this planet that has the actual license to call me Bradley full time, and he's my father at this point. So beyond that, almost
when my
no one
mom
else.
said my full name, I was in trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's I don't have whatever he listens to the podcast, I'm sure we'll get a chuckle out of that because he's the only one left that has that permission at this point. But it's you see it on all your licensing stuff and everything, and I'm like, okay, well, no one in the world really calls me that, but it's good. So
it's like my Elizabeth, that never want to be called Elizabeth,
Oh, yeah.
except the first day of school.
Oh yeah.
But I had just started to ask Brad a question. I want to hear the
Fire
answer.
away.
Do you ever turn down a listing? Because we were talking about these bad properties that you get invited to.
That's the easiest question to answer.
Is it really?
It's yes.
You don't pass it to someone on your team. You just say,
I used to have, in the earlier part of my career, I used to use what I call the Hoover method, which was get any listing at any price, because you figured, a sign on the street would lead to another prospect. A buyer would come and not like the house but want to work with you. But then you come to find it's like, if you have a seller that doesn't want to follow your guidance and they don't want to follow the market price data, then you're ending up with somebody that's going to be very hard to get across the finish line. And, eventually the relationships typically don't end out, where you want to be. And then you only have so much bandwidth. So if you give energy to something that's not growing or leading towards something, then it's basically taking energy from you. And if you get a lot of listings at the same time, those can really be the ones that take you down.
do you like working with buyers or sellers better? Because I know,
I love working with buyers. I don't work with buyers that much anymore because I have 4 agents plus myself on my team. So primarily, a lot of our leads come in on our listings, and then I'm the listing agent. So, I can only represent one side of the transaction. Right. So that's, I give it to one of the, but I used to spend weekends, all day, every day showing. The big difference now is that buyers are doing the showings online primarily.
Right.
And they're not calling and saying, hey, I want to spend up to $2 million and I want waterfront. And then you send them the listings. And then they say, Saturday, we'll come for 4 hours and we'll see 8 houses. That's how it used to be. And then I would finish up with that group and meet another group. And the problem when you don't get out with and see a lot of the, inventory in person is you have a hard time understanding the nuances of the properties. And that's a key thing for a realtor to understand how to price properties. You really got to get out. And so I think, but the listing side is, it's a more of an administrative, job that's done within the confines of like the work week, and the buyer agent job tends to be more of a weekend job.
Good point.
Yeah.
When you were, let's say, when you were primarily doing buyer side work, and when did you have days during the week that you would take off as like your weekend, or how did you structure your lifestyle with that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because we literally this is something that comes up pretty frequently. What really differentiates our team, and we talk about all the time, is just by the nature of our kind of tenacious approach to real estate. We work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The more you work, the more successful you get, and the more people seek you out, and it's kind of a vicious cycle, and so, setting up balance and trying to figure out, when can I pull away for family or go fishing or go paddleboarding so that when I come back to it, I'm refreshed and I can have energy, because you can just what's really kind of magnified the issue with the bandwidth is the multiple ways of communication. So texting is the primary communication for our clients now. In my whole career until 5 years ago, we really didn't text much. It was, now the first thing we do is we set up a text chain with our clients, because it's a fluid way to communicate. The problem is texting can happen at any time of day.
Yeah.
You have to check your text, you have to check your voicemail, you have to check your email. Some people like to hit you from all angles, and they can also, because the email is sitting in a desktop, right? You don't have to respond to it as quickly, but a text, they know, that you're seeing it, and so it's
I am starting to see people treat email like text though,
Yeah.
which is like the expectations of like, you're like, I sent you this email 4 minutes ago and you haven't responded. And, and I think, I think that's a evolution of our society generally. And, we're in this Amazon Prime generation where, everyone wants and they want it now.
Right.
And, I think that creates, when people talk about like work-life balance as an example,
Right.
I don't think that there's technically in this modern era really a balance. I think it's more of like, how far are you willing to push certain things to get there?
Right.
But I do think it's interesting because the expectation management part of the game becomes so much more critical. Because without setting those, where I find a lot of agents struggle is they're not setting the appropriate expectations up front. And then all of a sudden their lives are getting just driven by this constant communication. And, to your point, it can be a 24/7 game. It is one. It's how do you manage that 24/7 game? And I think, being an outsider watching a lot of the protocols that you've put into place and how your team operates, I think that's really what it is like, can you get to that level where you have these other professionals around you to take off some of, whether it's an administrative burden, because that's a big part of what we do. Is it availability to show property, as to your point about having the 4 team members now that can do that? I think even some of what you guys have done geographically with Joe kind of being the Eastern Shore specialist has really, like when you did that maneuver, I was like, oh, it's really smart because it's not, if you have a Saturday afternoon showing in, on the Wye River, that could be an hour and 20-minute commitment depending on what, one way depending on what the bridge is doing.
Yeah.
So that it's in some cases probably quicker to go by boat to do the showing than it is,
Yeah, we were just over there last week in Easton. Yeah, it was a haul. Yeah.
So Brad, I always go back on something that you said related to emails and responsiveness and how quickly you have to get back to people because, we're always on our phones. We're always looking at things and like, if I don't respond, but Brad said this to me and it's really stuck with me. You're a professional. You're in demand. You have a lot of people asking you questions. They want your expertise. You do not need to respond right away. It's different with people putting in contracts and what, but like you need to.
I think there's
set the
you just set the expectations. There's certain things that are true time sensitivity components, and then there's things where I had a call with a client this morning and they were hot to trot on something, and they weren't closing until September 30th. They weren't even under contract. I was like, all right, we can schedule a follow-up call that we can schedule. And it was, and that was an interesting one because I was an unrepresented buyer. Right.
So you're playing many roles.
Well, you wind up playing. And frankly, for me, I've got, for sale by owners within our business we refer to them as FSBOs. And I've got another term around which FSBOs are those type of shows because they can be a shit show at the end of the day. Like and the reason why I say it that way, and our team knows that I think about it that way, is because I view the role of an agent as a professional advisor.
Right.
And I think there's a section of the agent population that treats it that way. And then there's a section of the agent population that doesn't treat it that way.
Right.
And the people who look at it as a professional advisor, generally most people have boundaries with their accountant or their doctor or their, attorney or whatever that might be.
Right.
Sometimes if you don't have that professional relationship with them, they won't treat you that way. Like I wouldn't necessarily just be like, call up my doctor right now and be like, I'm coming in tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for my annual physical. They'd be like, well, that's not how this works. And so there's a very interesting difference between providing a professional experience, being a professional advisor, but also having a customer service focus to it. And, I think to Betsy's point, some of that too goes to exactly what I've kind of been watching you do with building the team out. Because while I may not always be available, because I could be doing something like this, I could be in a closing, I could be running, doing business planning or administration. having a team that can service the people where they don't actually necessarily need me. I think that was the hardest thing in my career, was being able to let go of the person may not necessarily do it the way I would do it.
Mm-hmm.
If they can do it 90% of the way that I would do it,
right,
that is good.
it's good enough. Right.
And not like, and it's, one of our core values for Eagle is good enough is not good enough for us, and just good enough is not good enough for us. And so it was this really fine battleground because and that was really about a commitment to improvement and excellence on it, of like, are we improving what we're doing? Like, not just saying, that's fine.
Right.
Like, fine isn't really a world that we like to live in. Because we want to make process improvements. We want to change. But have those other people step in and fill those gaps to where, can they respond faster than I can?
Yeah.
Can Misty respond faster than you can? And if you're in an hour and a half listing appointment, you're locked in for that hour and a half, right? They don't want to see you on your phone, responding to a message, right? Like, that's not that, again, think professional advisor relationship. I don't go into my doctor's office and, have her sit there and she's like, hold on, let me go treat another patient real quick while we're on the phone here,
Well, that plays into another one of our core values, is there's no I in
LWS.
Because you have to
Yeah.
work as a team, especially
It's
you have,
efficiency.
and it gives other people an opportunity to grow and expand and be better, instead of you stepping in all the time and doing it for them.
Well, it's funny about I think there's a part of it too with collaboration.
Yeah.
And I think, we first started working together, it's had to be over a decade ago.
Oh yeah.
Trying to think,
You had that little office above.
when we were in Town Center.
Yeah, Town Center.
And so that was
one of my first settlements.
We left there in we moved to our current home base in July 1st of 2016. So it would have been coming up on over 10 years. And
wow,
I'll never forget one of the first properties we ever worked on. You were actually the listing agent on that property, and Joe was on the buy side, and that was down in Shore Beach. And we had they had a real bad survey on it where like half of the roadbed came through the.
Was it waterfront?
It was a point.
What percentage of the properties that you work on, whether it's the buy side or the listing side, are waterfront? Would you say it's like,
well,
like statistics
year over year, they're very. It's a pretty consistent balance of, we have 131 sales last year, transactions, and 84 were waterfront.
Wow.
So
okay, that's
Yeah.
a lot.
That's a big number.
Eagle Title is our preferred. There's no financial benefit at all working with Eagle Title. Where I benefit is I like win-win scenarios, and I have preferred vendors across the board, and none of them give me any payola or kickbacks or anything. But with Eagle, the saying is, I don't want to make the meatballs, right? I want to just show up for a nice meal and have Brad or Terry, sit down and, share some niceties, sign here, and we're out of there. If I have to get into it's hard enough to sell a house and get it to contract. Once we hand the file off, I just expect that his team, your team, are just going to get it done. And so I tell my sellers, like, look, if we can get Eagle Title on the transaction, that's where we want to be, because it's a control point, and I know that they're going to get it done. And that's a big issue in the industry, is title companies that don't have a lot of frequency, have a lot of turnover in staff, don't have good protocols, and then you end up in a position where you wish, you had somebody else, reviewing the file. And
Well, it's so important because your client, I feel a huge responsibility with settlements. I compare it not to meatballs, but like a ballet recital. And so there's all this prep that goes in, knowing the property. I never walk in like, here's your file. Like, I want to know everything. Is this well or septic, first time home buyer, HOA? Like, I want to know all the details. And so you're preparing for this recital, and it's either going to go really well,
right,
or it's going to be a flop. And so it's our responsibility to make it go really well, because then the lender looks good, the agents, everyone looks good, and everyone walks away happy. But if you screw it up, it's like
you talked about controlling the controllables, right? So
control the controllables.
When you think about it, because every transaction has so many different data points from all of the things you just mentioned, right? HOA, front foots, water, all that. But you've got these transactions where people, they're emotional generally.
Yeah.
You know, it's not business transactions to them. They are emotional about it. But I think when you can control the controllables and you have,
That's a
whether
good
it's
way to put it.
bandwidth, whether it's expertise in a certain area, all of those things are factors that can dictate a successful settlement or a show.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, when you can control those things, and to your point about even being able to keep them in-house and taking those variable factors out, you know, a lot of times, you know, you can look at a contract on it day one and go, all right, I got a feeling how this one's going to go.
Yeah.
Because if all of a sudden you get this West Coast lender that, you know, you're like, all right, well,
I had one of those this week.
Most agents know that too, right up front, and most of them can steer.
To your point, I mean, that makes me think of a couple things. Like one of the things I tell people all the time is, you know, I am not going to be learning at your expense, right? So when you're hiring a professional, whether you're hiring, you know, a good orthopedic surgeon to do your knee replacement, you know, or you're getting title services done or selling your house, it's you know, frequency is huge. So the problem with the industry is, you know, there's a couple thousand realtors just in this county, but only, you know, it's like 30 of them sold more than 5 million last year, right? In total sales. You start breaking that down, you got, you know, 1,950, let's call it plus or minus realtors that did less than, you know, 5 million. You know, so that means they only did, you know, 5-7 transactions over the course of 12 months. It's like anything else. It's like, you know, playing golf. Frequency, the more you solve problems, the more you understand the market. So most agents take 10 years to build up a bank of knowledge to be able to actually bring value to their clients. And that's why a lot of people don't really respect realtors, and they don't think they actually have a professional acumen because they get a license and all of a sudden they're a realtor. And, you know, if you don't have a lot, like, you know, when we have 100 transactions a year, you know, we know. So what that leads to is where I think Eagle Title excels is once you get to a point where you really know what you're doing and you really deliver over and over again, you can be proactive. So most agents and most businesses are in reactionary mode all the time. They just wait for problems and then try and put them out. So we did a deal with Eagle last year. We sold an island, and it was under contract for 8 or 10 weeks. A week before settlement, the title company, we won't name them, calls and says the property is deeded to the wrong LLC. Okay. Did you just open the file today? And, you know, and that's
this is a freaking island.
Yeah,
like
correct. Exactly. Like a corrective deed situation. And then it turned out that the person that the LLC, you know, the misindexed LLC, well, they weren't in too much of a hurry to, you know, sign a bunch of paperwork, and they thought maybe they should make money on it. And it caused all these problems. So, you know, when you can get ahead of a problem, or you can be looking, you know, always say out the windshield and not in the rearview mirror all the time, well, what happened? And then you're at a point where you really bring value. And that's where I think, you know, we've watched our businesses grow together, but you got to have frequency. You can't just say from day one, oh, I'm your person. I mean, you have to have a lot of mistakes. You have to learn, you got to build. And then you get to the point where you really do, I think, deliver what the clients expect.
Well, I think I sometimes refer to that as like the curated experience. And, you know, when I talk to agents, and especially if I'm teaching like continuing education as an example, I refer to agents as practitioners, because to your point, no different than orthopedist who's going to be replacing my knee. Like, they're a practitioner at their job, and they need reps and they need to get better. And, you know, over time
and
it gets
you
there.
ask them, by the way, having had a son with an ACL tear and a husband with an ACL tear, how many of these have you done?
Yeah.
How many do you do in a week? How do you line them up? How many do you do in a day?
Because what happens is a lot of
important.
times with that, the procedures that they put in place, right? If you go into, you know, to have your shoulder done or whatever, they've got a procedure in that OR.
Right.
They do the same thing every way, the same time. And to your point, I think that does allow for that looking forward moment. You know, our team, we're set up where we have daily huddles with each of our teams within the whole thing. And what we're talking about in there is we're looking
transactions.
at that gives the team a dedicated focus to say, what roadblocks do we have on our transactions? Not the stuff necessarily that's closing tomorrow.
Right.
It's the things where it could be 45 days down the line, but if you don't, you know, there's only two things that solve problems in our business: time and or money.
Right.
And sometimes it's just time, and you need the time. And to your point, like, when you were doing that transaction, had they realized earlier on
Right.
that LLC was, the inappropriate vested owner on that property, they could have not had that thing up against the wall where then
Exactly.
the uninterested party in that moment is not
leverage.
looking for for a cash situation.
Right.
That's where money does solve the problem. But
Right.
unfortunately, people look at it, and I mean, I had a transaction last year over in Eastport where there was a 10-foot strip of land on the backside of the property had been given to the property owner, where the city of Annapolis essentially canceled the alley that they had from back in the day, and they gave 10 feet to either side of the whole strip down.
Yeah.
Well, when they did the estate planning deed for the prior owner or current owner, or whichever it was, they never included the 10-foot strip because they just went to the title
Just did a
deed.
quick claim.
Yeah, and so they missed this 10-foot. Well, we were able to go back down, find the person who sold it to him 40 years ago, and we tracked him down. But the person was like, well, how much are you going to give me for this 10? And you're like, well, you already agreed to convey this 40 years ago. But in that moment, there wound up being a cash payout, but they got attorneys involved.
Yeah.
We had to work through the whole issue and get there. But that took some time and then wound up taking some money. But those are the type of things, if you're not, like we always talk about, we order our abstracts
I was going
the
to say
second we
that.
get the contract.
Right.
Because-
Agents will say, oh, we need to get through inspections. I'm sending this contract, but just
Right.
like
That's
hold off until, and I
That's a
always,
business expense that you
Brad's
just,
like, nope, order the title and
Right.
it
I want
saves
to,
us.
because
A lot of times.
so many of these, if we just had more time,
Yeah.
you could get to it.
Right.
And, one of the big things that we're running into as an industry right now in the state of Maryland was that ice storm that we had back in February.
Yeah.
It essentially choked off our market for 30, 45, 60 days, depending on some of these properties. And a whole bunch of people weren't dying to buy a waterfront property,
Right.
as an example, when, the creeks were iced over. It's tough to envision yourself paddleboarding
Right.
when it's
Yeah.
ice. Like you can't,
Especially because there was solid ice, you couldn't go outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You couldn't go down on the dock. You
No.
couldn't go, see,
Yeah.
I think especially if it's a second home purchase or something like that, people want to envision themselves
Right.
pulling up the crab traps, having, the family over on a Sunday afternoon. It's tough to do that when it's covered
It
with
was
snow or ice.
tough.
But what's wound up occurring
time.
now is a lot of those transactions have gotten crammed into this small window. Well, when you talk about waiting to order an abstract, as an example, all of those service providers, and as a service provider, your bandwidth is only built for a certain amount of units.
Right.
And I use historical numbers. I'll use, I've got a Excel spreadsheet that has the transactions by county for the last 15 years by month.
Yeah.
And so when we look at our staffing projections and everything, I'm looking at that to try and say, okay, I'm tracking right now as like a 2017, 2018 are more like representative years for as far as units go in what I'm looking at.
Right.
Anything can change that though, right?
and-
That's the thing. If the rates went down just a smidge.
I mean, if the Iran war stopped tomorrow,
Right.
it would be a big
it
difference
probably within 60 to 90 days we'd get some relief,
in the rates, and then you'd see an uptick.
and then it's a whole nother issue, which that was really the issue when COVID hit. The faucet was turned off for a little
Right.
while, and then all of a sudden it was wide open.
Right.
Gushing.
And then the service provider, I don't care whether you're an abstractor, an appraiser,
Right.
a home inspector,
Yeah. They all went full bandwidth. Just
Lender.
they all went full bandwidth,
Yeah.
and it was just
right.
wide open. Right now we're dealing with that bubble because it was a delayed spring.
Right.
And so we've got a lot going through the pipe at this current time, but that's where the processes matter. That's where ordering it quickly matters. A lot of times people, they'll be like, well, I don't want to order the survey on the property until I know that I'm going forward with it. I'm like, well,
It'll be too
I
late.
say, just be careful because they get backed up.
Right.
I can't control them. But secondarily, I look at a survey, the primary use of a survey as an example in my world is due diligence.
Right.
No different than a home inspection. I mean,
Right.
I cannot tell you how many properties and surveys I've looked at where someone's like, yeah, but the fence line's here.
Oh,
I'm like,
yeah.
oh no, you put that fence 25 feet onto the property behind it. It's like, well, how would ever, why would they do that? I'm like, well, I'm not a fence contractor, so I can't tell you, but sometimes people are like, well, it's the county property, so we just used it as our own.
Stuck it there, yeah.
So like sometimes getting the survey done will tell you the real story behind it.
Especially on waterfront.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued how I know you grew up in this area, and the Chesapeake Bay is really important to you, but can you tell us a little bit how you became the expert on waterfront property? And also, I told you I was going to ask you about the education you got at the Chapman School of seamanship, because I think all that stuff brings more to your ability, your knowledge, and how you can advise your clients. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got to this place?
That's a very timely theme, because tomorrow my son starts as an intern. Today's his last day at Severn School, and tomorrow
I saw his picture on your
I'm not
website.
going to let him sleep in. I'm like, tomorrow we got a big photo shoot at a big estate, and I said, you got to be there, you got to do this.
Does he want to follow your footsteps?
Yeah, he does.
Think?
But see, this is so perfect. You're good at this.
Okay.
So that's exactly
Podcast pro.
Yeah,
Betsy
well, I mean,
Jiranek.
because then it's like, I do a lot of these podcasts, and I do a lot of panels, and I speak to leadership groups, and people want to know, well, how the hell did you scale your business, and do it in the way that you did it, and there's different words and adjectives I use to kind of, the three that is the, being authentic. Authenticity
Totally.
is really key. It's very hard, I think, to be a realtor in a market you didn't grow up in and be able to scale like I've scaled. You can be successful, but it's very hard to, unless you buy a book of business. And then I think, being proactive is the other thing that's really, which I equate to answering your phone. That's a big thing, just like, show up and be ready. And a lot of that goes back to this grit piece, is what I talked to my son Gordon about, is, I've had a lot of very hard jobs, and I've worked really hard my whole life. My father had the seafood markets, Annapolis Seafood. He bought a gas station with a partner in 1978, the year I was born. And I would go there before school and smelling like fish. And I, worked in the fish department, cutting fish, steaming crabs all summer, on your feet,
But that helped
nasty,
with the ladies.
stinky. Oh, it was horrible, but it was cool, because those guys don't give you any. I mean, these are like, if you're working in a seafood market and you're 40 years old, back then, like, you either were a criminal or, they're not cutting you slack.
No.
So they, and I was the owner's son, right? So they, they pushed me. And then, I went into, the restaurant business. My father had a restaurant, Paul's on the South River, and I was I used to wash dishes in my first job. And then I went out in the front of the house for about 2 weeks as busboy, and I said, oh no, I like it better in the kitchen. So then I became, worked my way up to being head chef. I worked there 6 years as the head chef. And what kind of transpired is I went to college, and then I'd always wanted to work on charter boats, and I wanted to be a fisherman. All right. I thought I did. I'd grown up going out of Hatteras and, Oregon Inlet and all these places, and being on the Chesapeake Bay is an inland body of water. So in order to get near coastal hours, you need 90 hours of near coastal to get your captain's license, so that you can have a license to be able to fish in the ocean.
Okay.
So Chapman School of Seamanship is in Stuart, Florida, and it's a really cool school. It's a 90-day, or it's like 3 months, and you go down there and you get 90 hours on the water, and all their boats have been donated. They have sail, they have a tugboat, they have a 60-foot sport fish, and it's an old motel that was bought by the school. And then you do everything from weather to rules of the road to marlin spike, like tying knots. And it was really cool. And I went through all that.
I want to go now. When
Yeah.
I hear you talking.
But here's the
Me
thing.
too.
This is the best part. So you know how life, you got to be able to pivot. So I'm there, and towards the end, I started working on this old Egg Harbor, 38 Egg Harbor sport fish out of Sailfish Marina. And the guy hired me to be the mate. And, get there at 4.
In Florida. So
in
you
Florida.
were still in Florida.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was at school. And I get there at like 4:30 in the morning, and get the boat, like prep the ballyhoo, and it smelled so bad on the boat, because the boat was an old Detroit diesel boat, just like oil slick behind the boat.
Those old eggs. Just,
Yeah, and this guy smoked these cigarello, those little miniature cigar cigarettes. Oh my God! And we'd be out there, and then the crew would, people would show up, and they would all just be so drunk within like 2 hours. We're out there, and we come back, and just the smell of the diesel and the cigar, and then I just decided while I was in school, like, if I'm going to do boating, it's going to be for pleasure. I don't want to work on the water. It was just like a simple decision. So that's when
That's good. You went through all that,
I came back home, and that's when I jumped into being a chef. And then that taught me, and also I spent 2 summers working on the Outer Banks at Dockside North and Dockside Corolla seafood markets, and I was a manager there, and that was really hard work because we were super busy, and so those all have different skill sets. And then I also spent 2 summers managing Suntime boat and jet ski rentals behind Yellowfin.
Oh yeah.
Oh my, we had 7 boats and 4 jet skis. And the people from the city would come down and rent them for 4 hours. The boats for 4 hours or 8 hours, and the jet skis were an hour. And you talk about like the problems, like
that was like the early version of like the boat clubs before the boat club really was a thing.
So much liability. They would wreck them, and get crab pots and wrapped around. But I had 4 guys that worked for me there, and it was a big deal to get there in the morning, get all the boats uncovered, all washed. Jet skis had to be launched, beached, filled with fuel, and so that was, and it was hot, being out there. So all these different jobs, I think, gave me the authenticity and kind of the grit. And then when I left Paul's, when I was a chef, one night I was cleaning up the floor and I had WRNR, the local radio station, on, and they had an ad. I was like, "Are you personable and self-motivated? We're looking for an account executive." And I was like, I went home and I told my wife, I said, "I'm done," because I thought I was going to take over the restaurant, but I didn't really have a passion for the restaurant business because it was nights, weekends, and holidays.
Yeah, it's brutal.
And I worked Tuesday to Sunday for 6 years straight, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. We had Mondays off, closed on Mondays. So it's like in a room with no windows. The kitchen had no, you didn't know where you were, which is kind of cool, but for a short period of time.
Yeah.
So then I got into the R&R, WRNR advertising sales. That was probably the hardest sales job I've ever had because you're selling these 30-second or 60-second puff of air to a business owner that doesn't even listen to the channel, and you're walking into a car dealership and they hate sales reps. And you're just pounding the pavement over and over and again, and there's no emotional, there's nothing nice about, business sales when you're selling radio advertising.
It's so different than selling real property. I mean,
well, I always said that's the best part about my job now. Is back then I used to say, selling radio advertising was like, selling a drug to a business owner where they would get high for a little bit, but their, the Brinks truck didn't pull up out front, and their business was not any higher, in sales volume typically than it was before they started. It was just like a way to
get their name out there.
Yeah, or like if you had an event or something. So it was always this kind of you didn't feel like the value that you were giving through the advertising was being captured by the business owner. So it was a little bit of a, you kind of wanted to get in and get out.
That as a title company.
Yeah.
I bought ads space on talk radio.
Yeah.
I forget the call letters.
The Towson?
No.
WTMD?
No, I can't. It was funny because I never listened to it, but people would say, "Oh, I was driving into work. I heard, you title company." So I bought it because of the person, the salesperson. Yeah, I knew her and I wanted to support her. It had nothing to do.
Funny, on those things, rarely can you actually draw the connectivity between the two.
Yeah,
I did get a text though this morning from someone who's in my network, and they saw one of the advertisements in What's Up magazine. And I didn't know that you guys did this section, and they asked about something on it. So you're like, oh, I guess people do read that, or whatever. Yeah. But it was funny when you were bringing up the seafood market. It brought back like a PTSD moment for me, because when I was 16, one of my first jobs, one of the first jobs I could drive to, I should start with it that way, was I worked at Wild Goose Seafood Market in Arnold.
Yeah,
and,
Bill Bolter.
Yeah, and a grizzly old
he was like a soft clammer.
Yeah, and cool. He was like he was an awesome guy. He taught me.
Yeah. What was your job there? What did you do?
So I was a steamer. I worked the steamers. I worked the fry station. I worked we had like a short order cook.
I had to keep all my clothes outside. When I come home, I put all my shoes and everything outside. Because if you brought inside, it was...
So my dad, like the first day I came home, and if you've never been in the back room of like a steamer or anything like that, it's a hot, sweaty mess.
Yeah.
But as a 16-year-old, I was like, man, this is awesome. Like sometimes you just like walk into the cooler just to cool down a little bit. But he taught me so many things about life in that job. And I wish I could could actually like he could come to our shop and I could like show him some of the stuff that he did, because
Yeah.
you talk about like an old grizzly waterman, like what is he going to give you that you would bring to run the business today? But it did remind me about the clothes, because I had like this black t-shirt and I had like these, like khaki cargo shorts that like had bleach stains all over them.
Yeah.
But one day I tried to come into the house after work and my dad was like, outside,
Yeah.
go around back, and he would make us, or he'd make me take off all my clothes on the back patio behind the house and walk through and go straight to the shower. And then eventually he made me start putting trash bags over the seats in my car, because he's
Yeah.
like, what,
Smart,
because what do you
though,
think
yeah.
you're sitting on? You're sitting in like these clothes that
Yeah.
you're just in there. But that's where I learned to start to learn how to short order cook, on a griddle top. Definitely learned how to steam crabs and, all the other
Yeah.
cheesesteak
all,
hooks.
all sorts of stuff there. But the funny things that he taught me about, like, were so simple, but to a 16-year-old, they're not. And,
Right.
like, because I think about my, Dean just turned 12. So I'm like looking at him coming into that kind of age group of starting to be able to actually
It's
teach
job,
him
yeah.
things,
Well,
sort of stuff.
responsibility, showing
Well, it's
up, being
responsibility.
on
It's all that.
time.
But then it was funny because like the first day I was stocking the cooler at Wild Goose, he's like, go stock the cooler. And I'm like, okay, take the cart over. And I like go to stock the cooler. And he goes, what the hell are you doing, boy? And I'm like, you told me to stock the cooler. And he goes, this is how you stock a cooler. And he said, you don't put the new stuff in the front. You got to put that in the back. He's like, because if a customer goes to reach up and it's warm because you just put,
Yeah.
wet in, they're going to be dissatisfied. And then he was like, and you need to like rotate the logo so that when a customer comes in, they can see exactly what you have. And so everything needed to go in.
Like
So
the
when-
refrigerators at the Eagle
is that,
Tunnel.
and that is exactly where, so that's where that came from.
Right.
Was
Yeah.
that gentleman who literally taught me, he was like, no, you need to think about
Right.
these things.
Yeah,
'Cause it was actually the smallest of things. And I found it really fascinating that guy who grew up on the water running a boat was thinking about these little things.
Because he's rough and
Because that was his style, but it was just funny. Like that small thing made a difference. And then when someone comes into one of our locations now and they're like, oh my gosh,
The
look at all
fridge
these
is-
and this.
Somebody's
Yeah.
type A around here.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
And
it's-
that's not generally like my,
Right.
but it was more about like, how is your client experiencing you?
Right.
So I found that part interesting to it. But, I think when you talk about all that experience on the water and growing up around the water, it's really fascinating. I think if you wouldn't mind, one of the things I've always found when you talk about your knowledge of waterfront real estate and, with how much you guys do, what are some of the factors that you see that you bring into it? Is, I mean, we were joking about it because one of my buddies was buying a property that didn't appeal to me because it was the house pointed towards
Oh,
where the
right.
sunrise was. I'm like, well, I'm not up for sunrises.
Yeah.
You want
I
the
am awake
sunset.
for sunsets, so
Right.
I'm more of a sunset guy. Like, what do you, when you go to look at a listing or a property and you need to value it, what are some of the factors that you look at? When
And
you
can
go
I
to that?
interject one thing just
Yeah.
because I'm from the Baltimore area?
Yeah.
And I don't know, do you do any waterfront in Baltimore County? Like
No, we
okay.
have we were talking earlier about time management and being efficient and really bringing value. I'm a believer that I can't, I only bring value and I only take listings and service clients where I actually know the product. And I feel like, if I get a call for something and I just sent, Sotheby's Network, I just sent one of my clients wanted to sell her house in Naples, Florida. And we have the top agent in
Yeah,
the region there.
yeah.
And I called her and she says, great, and she's like, oh, I live on that street. I know that house well, So I don't go to Baltimore because I don't know the
You
market.
don't know it. That's
But we have an
fair
agent
enough,
at TTR Sotheby's who has a team that services that market.
Okay.
So I can just call and say, hey.
Yep.
But back to your question, I think I think that's where being a waterfront expert and understanding like what does that mean? It's I always say the best way to sell is FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's how you sell people. The fear of making a bad decision, the fear of buying something that doesn't meet your needs, the fear of buying something that's going to cost you a lot of money to remediate.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing. People want to buy more on the aspirational side, right? But it's like, look, well, I'm just going to take those trees down because I really want to get a better view. It's like, well, no, you can't. Right? Or I'm just going to put a pool here, and like, well, no. So what I try to do is first of all, I tell them, look, you're going to call me the next 5 or 7 years to sell this house. So I'm not going to sell you something that you call me and I go, oh man, you shouldn't have bought that. We're like, it's a long-term relationship. So I'm looking at kind of what Mother Nature creates and what you can do to improve the property. And then, that all gets to the exposure, elevation. Is it high? Are you living in a waterfront property? Or are you living on the water? And that's a big differentiation, because if you want to walk out to your dock and with a glass of wine and you don't want to be up on a cliff, if you're not a boater, maybe you want more of a view. So kind of dialing in on the buyer's specific needs and how they're going to use the property. And, there's a story I tell people all the time about this guy was calling me about wanting to buy a property at a 50-foot Beneteau or something. And he's like, oh, I want to put it right out behind the house. I sail all the time. Great. So we go to, he gets me over to this property in South Haven. And I was like, we get there and I'm like, I get out of the car. I'm like, well, the Riva Road Bridge is like 24 feet high. I'm like, what are we doing? He's like, what do you mean? I said, you're landlocked. You're not going to get a sailboat out there, not that boat. So it's like, there's, I would say
that affects the value to it, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to cut down on
value is a big thing.
If you're going to cut down on, look, our whole world is supply and demand, right?
Right.
So if all of a sudden there's a certain percentage of boaters that property doesn't fit because they can't get their boat to in and out of easy on it, that's going to cut down demand. That could affect price. Like those sort of factors, hit it at the end of the day.
Yeah. So from the buyer perspective, it's like having a needs analysis and just determining very quickly, like what are the must-haves, what's their budget, and what's the frequency of that product coming to market, right? So they might say, I want all this, but I have this budget, or I want to only be in Eastport waterfront. Well, there's going to be 10 sales over the course of a year. Yeah. But on the listing side, I use the analogy with a lot of my clients. I'm a big Porsche 911 guy, and I love that brand, and I like the value. And whether it's an old Porsche or a new Porsche, they're always going up in value pretty much. They're tremendous investments, and there's a cult following for them. And I always think about some homes are, like a red, black, or white Porsche 911. It's what everybody wants. It's a commodity. It's easy to sell as long as you don't overprice it. But then there's the niche properties that are more like a brown Porsche 911, which has the same engine and the same performance, but people walk in the dealership and they're like, but then there's the guy or a gal that walks in and goes, oh my God, they have the brown one, So if your property is very niche, it doesn't matter about the view or the water depth or the access to open water. If there's other challenges, then it's really going to limit the price. So it's like, hard to give an overarching answer to pricing guidance based on waterfront features, but some properties, they check all the boxes. Like the one we're listing tomorrow or photographing is one of the most incredible properties I've ever seen. It has the most amenities of any property. It has an indoor pool, an outdoor pool. It has an indoor basketball court, an outdoor full tennis court, has 600 feet of beach, it has a golf simulator room, has a gym, a speakeasy, a trampoline area for kids, a 4-car garage, has an outdoor sauna, red light therapy sauna. And, so something like that, it's very different than,
Most of those people buy those kind of houses as a second home, or are those like primary
They don't
residence?
buy them as second home, but most of them that have that level of wealth do not want to pay the Maryland tax bill. So they primarily will have another property.
That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So I want to tell you, since you brought up Porsche, but I have to honor some privacy. I did a settlement for this guy who has he's way into Porsches too. I'm not going to use any names, but he bought a facility up in Carroll County that repairs Porsches.
Oh, wow.
And he has like some of the mechanics that are like experts in Porsches, and he told me stories about how they're flown in from all over the world.
Yeah.
And they have a passport, almost like we would have passports to travel internationally that go with it.
Wow.
But it's not a passport, it's some other documentation. They take them up to his facility.
Wow.
And repair them and then bring them back. I'm like, wow, I didn't know the cult, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that following is always so interesting. And as a guy who loves being on the water and boats, for me, my boat is like, that is my toy, that's my outlet, that's my release. And, to people like us, it's, you have like different factions within the boating community. You have the one who's like has a boat. Well, you have the person who's has a boat so they can say they have a boat, but they take it out like twice a year.
Right.
You then have, you know, the
It's a
people
money
that,
pit then, right?
well,
If you're not
for
using it,
it's just like anything. I think if you're not using it,
right.
it
If you're not using your
gets worse.
porch,
If
it's
you're
a
not using
money
your
pit
house,
too.
it can be the same
Right.
thing. I think the other thing with it for me is like, you know, I I love being on the water. I like even going down to wash the boat is not a big deal for me because I'm there on the
Right.
boat, enjoying it like on the dock. But it's
part
so funny because to your point about people maybe wanting to buy for a view,
Yeah.
I look at it, if I was buying waterfront real estate personally, the view's great, but is my boat protected?
Right.
And, you know, I use my brother's house as a great example. He's got this really unique spot where he's on the inside of a hurricane hole. And so the boats are very protected there.
Right.
It's great. If you went to the house next door, they have to have all of their boats on lifts because you get all of the traffic up and down the Magathie River that there's no protection, you know,
Yeah.
covering
It's
from
just
that.
next door. Yeah.
And so, you know, those types of things, like, you know, my wife thinks it's hilarious because she's like, well, if we ever went to the water, like, where would you go? I'm like, there's only like 7 houses that I would even consider going to because I don't want to be on that side of the street over there because it would be
Right.
like the boat would be open. You know, I'd have to have it on a lift. It would limit what I could get down the line. And, you know, she's like, but look at the view. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, but look at the boat, you know, and to your
Brad's
point, like,
taking notes.
I'd
'Cause he's
recommend-
gonna find out.
I'd
find out
recommend
how-
letting your wife steer that out.
Well,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I
but-
don't know if you know, Brad, but we always joke that we connected through water because
Yeah.
I'm a big swimmer
Oh,
and
wow.
I do a lot of open water swimming.
Yesterday there was
so-
a big open water swim in my neighborhood.
Oh, was there?
Yeah, they swam to the bridge and back. First time this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've there's
The-
a group called Annapolis Breakfast Club.
Yeah, that might
Do
be
you
them.
guys? It's ABC, and
Yeah.
I actually drive from Baltimore sometimes to join them.
Yeah, I wouldn't
Like, they do-
recommend swimming in Baltimore.
No, well,
I mean, I don't know the
Oh, she
harbor.
did-
I totally agree with
I
that.
don't know the.
so she does the swim across America, and they
Whoa.
do it at Gibson Island.
Oh.
And so they at the horse, they do it from the horse farm.
The
wow.
Walden's,
Yeah, Walden,
Shacks, yeah, that
And so
property.
Betsy
which
started
is
that
Wow.
years
17
ago.
years ago.
And so she'll let me
That's-
know like
that's
when
a
she's
nice-
coming down
Yeah.
to do the swim and all. Like,
The one thing I'll say, you know, and kind of follow up and that conversation is that I think, you know, in a nutshell, the best thing about selling waterfront property and buying waterfront
Yeah.
property is much like the Porsche 911. It's a super limited, scarce commodity that's always going up in value. May
Well,
not go up in value today, but I have never seen properties go down in value except for in 2008 when I started in the industry and we just come out of the global financial
Right,
crisis.
right.
But we're seeing, you know, the highest sale ever in Anne Arundel County in 2019 was 6.75 million. I sold one last year for 17.5
It's
million.
crazy, right?
You know,
place was
so it's not like it's a toy like a boat that's depreciating as fast as you can, you know, pay off the bill. It's something that's going up in value. So if you're getting a lifestyle and an investment, you know, and you can afford to pay for the property and maintain it, it's like a win-win, you know, and for people that have, you know, enough wealth where they can diversify their wealth and have a toy like a waterfront property, it's a toy that you can use, enjoy, and have a return. And that's what, to me, so it's great when I run into people in a grocery store and they're like, God, we love our house. We were in Chevy Chase. We thought we'd come on weekends. We moved here full time. You know, and it's just like, you know, and then they call me to sell it. And then we look on the settlement statement and they're like, damn, we paid $800,000 for this and we're selling it for $2 million. You know, and they're
It's
like,
nice,
yeah.
yeah.
So it's like all those years they had, they were for free and they made money, you know?
Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
interesting perspective on that. And I think that, you know, I mean, you talked about the house you sold last year. We've seen some really incredible properties hit the market in the
Yeah.
last couple of years that I don't remember. I'm going to say since I've been in the business, an era where we've seen this many incredible
No.
waterfront real estate properties hit the market. And it's just really fascinating to me because some of these ones that are coming up, to your point, like all the amenities that you
Yeah.
just listed on the one you're shooting tomorrow, like some of these ones are just really unique. They're, you know, you can see yourself, like, you know, we'll go to Brokers Open sometimes and we'll go in and like, the thing I like about it is like, you go in and you're like, okay, I could see myself on a Sunday afternoon here with the family, you know, as, you know, everyone goes,
Right.
because, you know, everyone tells me as your kids get older, like you got to create more reasons to keep them around the house and want to
Right.
be coming back. And, you know, that, you know, from when I grew up with my parents, that was, they had the boat and
Right.
we'd be, you know, I'd be at college and I'd like call my parents and be like, where are you guys going this weekend on the boat? And we'd drive up and like park on the side of some little road and like meet them at a landing. But I bring all the crew from school with me, and we'd go up and spend the night on the boat with them. And for them, like, how awesome is that? Your kids want to like come,
Right.
meet
Oh,
you
it's
wherever
great.
you
But
are.
let me just
You
tell
know,
you, I often say I have 2 kids in Tampa and one in LA. And I say, what did I do wrong? My kids, like, I got to
Yeah.
get on a plane to go see them. And then I say, what did I do right? They're like totally independent. They're,
Right.
excelling. But I do miss that, like, carrot. Like, how am I going to get you to come back? And I mean, Anne Arundel County and Annapolis is seeing a different trend than
Yeah.
Baltimore. I mean, it bums me out. Like, I feel like, come on, we've got a lot to offer. We need to see the city,
Yeah.
provide opportunities. Like my kids couldn't find a job there, right? Like the
Right.
economy's not
that's the tough part
cranking.
about the city. And
Yeah,
I think
so
you're
I
seeing,
still love it, but
well, and I think it's interesting to me because the city has so much potential. If they could just figure it out and get it safe,
Yeah.
make some improvements to it, hopefully one day it'll have that renaissance to it. And
we're working on it. I mean, I think with David Bramble's his vision for Inner Harbor, like that is so dated, so not current. There's
Right.
pavilions and, let's go buy a candy at whatever store. What we need,
well, the
experience.
thing I like about the harbor is like if we go up for a ball game, like I'll take the boat.
Yeah.
And we'll go in and
But
I
not
love-
everyone can do that,
well,
Brad.
but no,
you know?
but
I
there's
love Harbor East.
Yeah.
Harbor East is
Yeah,
Harbor
I
East
mean,
is
it's all
awesome.
shifted,
Yeah, I
right?
love the
It's
marina
crazy
and-
what's
yeah.
happened with downtown Baltimore.
But,
But
Yeah.
I
to your
think
point,
they
not everyone
bring
can
it
do
back.
that, but I think the more that they try and provide opportunities to bring people in,
Right.
I used to live in Fed Hill for years.
I know
And like
you
I
did, yeah.
loved being in the city. I loved my time in the city. I just don't want to take my kids there right now. Like
Yeah,
they're,
it's too bad, right?
that's,
You
it's
won't
what-
even take them to a nose game this year?
Oh, I'll take them to, but that's what I mean. We'll
Ravens,
go by both
O's.
of those games.
That's one question for you, Brad. So, because I've had my head down grinding in real estate. How many offices? What do you have now?
That's a great question.
Because
So
I see the signs and I see the cool, swag, and I'm like, oh, Towson, really? Huh? Yeah.
yeah, so right now we've got the Baltimore office is up in Towson. We've got Severna Park, Annapolis. Just the most recent one we opened was in Prince Frederick, and then we've got a signing location in Chestertown and West Ocean City.
Wow.
The idea what we're working on right now is building this, I'll say, brick and mortar infrastructure to service kind of the central core up and down.
Mm-hmm.
Like I really want to get to Harford County and like the Bel Air market. There's a lot of units that are going
Yeah.
up there. And that's something that's I think would be an extension of our Towson market kind of going north because
Yeah.
there's so many people when you go up there and see how much development they've done up there,
Yeah.
Well, they
it is
commute.
insane.
Like
Oh,
during
commute
COVID,
down.
they
Yeah.
commuted to Philly
Oh,
from
yeah,
there.
it was-
You know what I mean? It's like
it's crazy.
Yeah, you would never.
So that's like
expect that.
whenever I look at it, I'm data driven. So I'll look at it and say, all right, well,
The number of units.
where are the units that are available? How much competition's in that market? Even if you look at like everyone wants to be in Montgomery County because of the property values,
Mhm.
but there's a hell of a lot of competition there
Right.
that you got to go in and bang your head against.
Everybody's an attorney
Howard County.
in Montgomery County.
Howard County's good.
Yeah.
Howard County has a couple really nice parts about it. It's a lot of more recent planned subdivisions. So you don't have some of the title issues that you have in other markets because of how planned that
Right.
was. But there's a lot of good service providers that are already in that market that have a good market share that you'd really have to go in and, go head to head on. I talk about them being secondary or tertiary markets that I like to, if we can get really good market share in those ones,
Right.
we can build it. But I also think it's about like our service model because there's nothing more that I love when someone's like, oh, I'm selling a house in Prince Frederick, but they live in Towson or, whatever. And they're like, well, you can just go to that
Swing
location
by.
and sign your documents there. You don't have to go all the way down. And it happens more and more because you're like, well, the house is here. Why wouldn't they want to close by it? But all of a sudden, whether it's a second home, whether it's, they're doing this as part of an estate and that was their parents' house, but they live, we have a lot of people who moved up to Southern Pennsylvania in like that York
Taxes.
area
Yeah.
for taxes. Well, they're selling stuff down here,
Yeah.
like it's convenient to have those those locations. So, I think the more that we build that out as
Yeah.
part of our service offering, I think it's going to be really helpful. And I think the biggest part about it for us is also aligning ourselves with people that are already in those markets.
Yeah.
That, I started out in Anne Arundel County, right? That's where I made my bones in our career. And,
Right.
to your point about being authentic, and I can speak about, the development of Harold Harbor and,
Yeah.
the issues that come with that. Betsy can do that about Ruxton all day long, right?
Right.
Like she knows that market so much better than I will ever know. I don't position myself as an expert in that area. Betsy is an expert in that area. And I think that's, from a confidence level,
Right.
I'm okay that I'm not an expert necessarily in that market.
You can't
it's
know
just
it
too
all,
much.
and it's- yeah.
I use like, when people they talked about like blockchain coming into our
Yeah.
industry. Eastport is the best example of why blockchain would be a disaster. So most people don't know when they platted Eastport way, way back in the day, what is now 6th Street was actually 1st Street then. And so they flipped the streets back in like the 30s or 40s. And so if you're living on 1st Street, your legal description may actually say 6th Street in the calls within it. It also gets a little bit more
Keeps
complicated.
you on your toes.
Well, the other,
Is that a typo?
no, well, it definitely, and if you don't know what you're doing, you can really screw some stuff up.
Right.
Because there's some other legal descriptions that actually call to the base of the Spot Creek Bridge.
Oh.
Well, the Spot Creek Bridge did not come in at its current location when it was originally built. It was actually over on, I think, 3rd Street, because when you come down Duke of Gloucester, it went straight across that way. So you could have a legal description that calls to the base of the bridge, because that was like the landmark that would never change in the early 1900s.
That's crazy. Yeah. Nuts.
Which the bridge is now 3 streets over now. So if you don't have some of that localized knowledge, you can get yourself twisted 10 ways till Sunday on it because you don't understand those issues. And I think that's part of local experts. It's part of people like yourself knowing the values of these communities. Hey, there's never been a home that's sold over this on this river. There's, the example you used about the South Haven house, I think is one of my favorite examples all time, because it really shows that institutionalized knowledge is not like, hey, this listing popped up on, Zillow this weekend and I want to go buy it. And you're like, that doesn't meet any of your needs.
No,
because
I forgot to tell you the one little other piece to that story, which is just that when I told it to you in kind of the inverse. I actually met him at the property the first time, and he had a Beneteau sticker on his car. And he got out of his car, and I said, "Oh, you're a sailor?" And he says, "Yeah, I got a 50-foot whatever Beneteau." And I said, "Well, there's a fixed bridge here." And he says, "Oh, I didn't know that." And then we got back in the car and went to the next listing.
But those are the things that again, if you were showing me property and you knew what was on my needs list as an example. We're not buying something that's, down in the mixing bowl across from the Naval Academy. Like, that's not, it's a great view. You're going to be great for Blue Angels. You're going to have a great view of the Academy, but your boat's going to be on a lift. And if you don't want your boat on a lift for whatever reason, then,
it's not going to happen.
So, I just think this discussion is great because the world's become so global and, with the internet and, who needs service providers, because you can just get online and order this and do this and use this platform. And but when it gets down to it, you need expertise in Anne Arundel County, or buying a house or selling a house on the water, or in Baltimore County, Green Spring Valley, or Ruxton, or wherever, in Baltimore City even. So like it's granular what we do, and having experts in those areas is incredibly important. So,
well, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it.
We're important.
Yeah.
We're important.
Yeah.
In
Well,
this
Brad,
world.
I appreciate you taking the time to come and join us. I know it is a busy market right now, but when we were thinking about people to have on, I think the way you've scaled your business, the way that you're very thoughtful about all of the aspects of your day, how you're building the team, and then how you can represent your clients as the best practitioner that you can. It's very thoughtful. It's easy to see from someone who works with you a lot to know, the intentionality of everything that you're doing, from how you're operating the business to how you're marketing and how, spending money to build that business is, it's very easy to see how serious you are about it. And it's been fun, to your point, for us to
we've
grow
had a
our
good
careers
time.
together.
I always say that's the thing. If you're having fun, typically that means, you're in the right place. Like I always tell my clients that, like it's going to be a little bit of a bumpy road, but we're going to have fun,
We're going to have fun while we're doing it.
I'm really
Yeah.
happy to have this hour to sit down and talk to you, because I hear Brad Kappel
No.
Kappel all around the office, because you're obviously very important to Eagle Title. And so
Thank
happy to meet you and hear your story. It's impressive.
Thank you. It was, Eagle Title's been a part of my success, and we've Terry Liff, one of the senior counsels. We've conquered some unbelievably challenging problems. I mean, to the point where anybody else would say, "Oh heck, let's just find something else to sell." And they've been there since day one, and so it's a win-win.
Terry's been a huge part of it, and
We didn't invite him on this, but
it would take
would
like
never
10
be able to
hours.
talk.
Yeah,
We don't have time.
we just got to get him shorten up his settlement times, and then we could
exactly.
we could really crank it up from there.
We say that with love.
He could be sitting in this room, and I'd say the same thing, because I've said it to him about 10,000 times. We were joking the other day. I've worked now with Terry for 17 years, and he said to me on Friday, he goes, "I'm making an improvement every day." I said, "All right, so hopefully it's not going to take 17 more years to get to the next."
Those leadership book on audio books.
He's mowing them down right now. I'm like, all right, let's listen to some of them. Let's put them in place. Well,
awesome.
Brad, thank you again for your time, and we appreciate
Thanks
you
for
joining us. And hopefully, until next time, be safe, everyone, and we'll see you again at Seat at the Table.